I didn't know the moment I refused his money would become the moment I lost my freedom. It started at 2:17 in the morning when the knocking came, slow and deliberate, like whoever stood outside already knew I wasn't going anywhere. Liam stirred in my arms, his small fingers clutching my shirt, and I remember thinking I just needed one quiet night, just one, but quiet never lasted long in my world. I opened the door and the hallway light framed him like something carved out of shadow and control. Tall, composed, untouched by the rain that still clung to the edges of everything else, and behind him stood men who didn't speak but didn't need to. I should have closed the door, I should have said nothing, but exhaustion makes you honest and fear makes you stubborn. If you're here about the money, I said, my voice barely steady, I told your people already. I don't want it. His eyes didn't change, not even a flicker, just a quiet kind of certainty that made the air feel heavier, like I had stepped into a room where the rules were already written and I hadn't been invited to read them. He stepped closer, not rushing, not forcing, just existing in a way that made space shrink around him, and I felt it, that shift, like the ground beneath my feet wasn't entirely mine anymore. You think this is about money, he said, his voice low, controlled, the kind of voice people listen to without realizing they're obeying. I tightened my hold on Liam, feeling his heartbeat against mine, fast. Uncertain, and I hated that a stranger could walk into my life and change the rhythm of everything in seconds. I'm not part of your world, I said, and I meant it, every word built from years of surviving without help, without shortcuts, without anyone owning a piece of me. Something in his expression almost softened, but it disappeared before I could be sure it was real. That's where you're wrong, he murmured. And then he leaned in just enough for me to hear what came next, not loud. Not threatening, just certain. You already belong to me. The words didn't hit like a threat, they settled like a truth I hadn't agreed to yet, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. I should have told him to leave. Should have shut the door in his face and locked every bolt I had, but across the street a car engine came to life, headlights cutting through the darkness, slow, deliberate, watching, and suddenly the man in front of me wasn't the only thing I needed to be afraid of. He noticed it too, of course he did, his gaze flicking past me for half a second before returning, sharper now, more focused. You have two choices, he said quietly. Straightening to his full height, you stay here and hope they don't come inside, or you walk out with me and let me make sure they never do. I looked at Liam, at the life I had built piece by fragile piece, and realized something I wasn't ready to accept. This wasn't about whether I trusted him, it was about whether I could survive without him. And the answer was already unfolding in the shadows outside my door. I did not move right away because walking away from your own life should never feel like the only option, but somehow it did, and that terrified me. More than the man standing in front of me, Liam shifted in my arms again, his head pressing into my shoulder like he could hide from whatever was happening just by not looking, and I realized he trusted me to keep him safe even when I had no idea how. You do not get to decide that, I said, my voice quieter now but sharper, holding on to the last piece of control I had left. I do not belong to anyone. Adrian did not argue, did not raise his voice, did not even look offended, which somehow made it worse because it meant he was not trying to convince me, he was simply waiting for reality to do it for him. The headlights across the street flickered once, then stayed on, steady and patient, like they had all the time in the world, and my chest tightened because I knew that kind of patience. I had lived around it long enough to recognize when someone was not leaving. They are not here for a conversation, Adrian said, glancing past me again, his tone unchanged but heavier now, like each word carried weight I could not see, and they will not knock like I did. I swallowed hard, my grip on Liam tightening without meaning to, and for the first time I hated that he was right more than I hated that he was here. Why me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Because none of this made sense, not the money, not the presents, not the way everything seemed to circle back to me like I had stepped into something I did not understand. His eyes returned to mine, steady, unreadable, and for a second I thought he might actually answer. Might give me something real to hold on to, but instead he said, because you are already in the middle of it. The words landed quietly but they settled deep, like a truth I had missed while trying to survive day by day, bill by bill, shift by shift. I thought refusing his money meant I stayed out of his world, but now I could see it clearer than ever. I had been standing on the edge of it the entire time. Liam made a small sound, barely a whisper, and I felt something in me crack because none of this was supposed to touch him, none of this was supposed to reach this far, If I walk out that door, I said slowly, forcing each word to stay steady, this does not mean I agree with you. Adrian gave the smallest nod, like he had expected nothing less, like my resistance was not something to break but something to account for. It means you are choosing to stay alive, he replied. The engine across the street grew louder for a second, then softened again. Like a reminder that time was not stretching in my favor, I looked back into my apartment, at the couch where Liam had fallen asleep earlier, at the small kitchen where I had counted every dollar twice before spending it, at the life that had always been mine no matter how hard it got, and I felt it slipping through my fingers without anything dramatic, just a quiet, irreversible shift. I stepped forward before I could change my mind, before I could pretend there was another option, and the moment I crossed the threshold, the air felt different, heavier, like I had just entered a space that would not let me leave the same way. Adrian moved beside me, not touching, not guiding, but somehow directing everything around us with nothing more than presence. And when the car door opened without him asking, when the men behind him adjusted without a word, I understood something I had tried not to see before. He did not need to force control because control was already built into everything around him. I hesitated just once, one last second with Liam still in my arms, and then I got into the car, and the door closed with a soft sound that felt far too final for something so quiet. The car did not start right away, and that somehow made everything feel more real, like even time was waiting to see if I would change my mind. But I did not move. I could not, because Liam was still in my arms and his breathing had finally slowed, soft and steady against my neck, trusting me in a way that made my chest ache. The door beside me clicked softly as Adrian got in, the space shifting again, quieter now, controlled, like the world outside had been sealed off without effort. No one spoke. Not the driver, not the men in the front, not even Adrian, and that silence pressed in harder than any question I could have asked. I stared out the window as the car finally moved, my building shrinking behind us, the single light in my apartment still on, and it hit me then. I had left everything without packing a single thing, without saying goodbye, without knowing if I would ever walk back through that door again. You will get your things, Adrian said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet like he had been following every thought in my head. Nothing you need will be left behind. I turned to him, my fingers tightening slightly around Liam, and for the first time since this started, I really looked at him, not just the suit or the presence or the control, but the man, the one sitting inches away from me. Like this was normal, like taking someone out of their life in the middle of the night was just another decision. You do not get to decide what I need, I said. And the words came out stronger than I expected, sharper, like I was holding onto something that refused to break. His gaze met mine, steady, unshaken, and for a second I thought he might push back, might remind me again of everything I could not control, but instead he said, then tell me what you need. The question caught me off guard, not because of what it meant, but because of how simply he said it, like he was not used to asking but had decided to anyway. I hesitated, the answer sitting somewhere between fear and instinct, and then I said it before I could rethink it. I need to know my son is safe. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like the weight of the conversation had moved. He is, he said, and there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a certainty that felt too absolute to question. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that safety was not something he could promise, not in a world I did not understand, not in a life I had never chosen, but the words did not come because deep down I already knew something I had not admitted yet. The moment I stepped into this car, his world had already wrapped around mine. Liam stirred again, his small hand gripping my shirt tighter, and Adrian's eyes dropped to him for the briefest second, just a glance, but it was different, softer, not the calculated control he carried everywhere else. He should be sleeping, Adrian said quietly, more to himself than to me, and then he reached forward slightly, adjusting the air vent so the draft would not hit Liam directly, the movement careful, deliberate, like he understood how easily something small could matter. I froze for a second, watching it, because that was not what I expected, not from him, not from someone who walked into my life and changed everything without asking. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter street, the city lights fading into something softer, more distant, and I realized we were not heading anywhere I recognized. Where are we going? I asked, my voice lower now, steadier, because fear had already done its worst and left something clearer behind. Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze shifting forward, and when he answered, His tone was calm, certain, like the destination had never been a question. "Somewhere no one will find you," he said, and something in the way he said it made my chest tighten again, not because I doubted him, but because I was starting to understand what that really meant. I was not just leaving danger behind, I was disappearing into his world completely. The gates appeared out of nowhere, tall, black, and silent, opening before the car even slowed, and I felt it again, that quiet shift, like I had crossed into something that did not ask for permission. The tires rolled over smooth stone instead of cracked pavement, and the world outside the window changed without warning. Streetlights replaced by soft ground lighting, noise replaced by a kind of silence that felt expensive, controlled, intentional. I held Liam closer without thinking, his small body warm against mine, the only thing that still felt familiar, still mine. The car came to a stop in front of a house that was too large to call a house, all glass and stone and shadows that hid more than they showed, and for a moment I did not move because stepping out felt like accepting something I still did not understand. Adrian stepped out first, not rushing, not looking back. Because he did not need to, everything around him already moved when he did. My door opened before I reached for it, and I hesitated just long enough to notice the way no one touched me, no one forced me, but somehow the expectation was still there, clear and unspoken. I stepped out, the air cooler here, quieter, and the door closed behind me with that same soft finality I was starting to recognize. Inside, the space was even larger, high ceilings, clean lines, everything in its place like nothing was allowed to exist without purpose, and I felt it immediately. This was not just a home, it was control made visible. "You can stay here," Adrian said, his voice calm, like we were discussing something simple, like I had not just been pulled out of my life in the middle of the night. I turned to him, my pulse steady now in a way that surprised me, because fear had shifted into something sharper, something that refused to disappear quietly. "For how long?" I asked, because that mattered, because staying implied leaving, and I needed to know if leaving was even part of this. He met my gaze, steady as always, and for a second there was something unreadable there, something I could not name. "Until you are safe," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like a promise wrapped around a cage. Liam stirred again, his eyes opening slowly, confused, searching, and I lowered my voice immediately, brushing his hair back the way I always did. "It is okay," I whispered, even though I was not sure if that was true anymore. His eyes moved past me, landing on Adrian, and for a second I tensed, waiting for fear, for hesitation, for the reaction I would have had at his age, but Liam only blinked, studying him quietly, and Adrian did something I did not expect. He lowered himself slightly, not fully, just enough to meet Liam at eye level without looming over him, and his voice, when he spoke, was different, softer, controlled in a different way. "You must be Liam," he said, and there was no command in it, no expectation, just a simple statement. Liam did not answer, just held on to me tighter, but he did not look away either. And I felt something shift again, small but real. Adrian straightened without pushing, without forcing anything more, and turned slightly, gesturing toward a hallway. "There is a room prepared," he said, looking at me again, not Liam, always back to me, always anchoring the decision there. I hesitated, not because I did not understand, but because I did, because every step forward felt like another piece of my old life slipping further away. "You planned this," I said quietly, not accusing, just stating what had become obvious. He did not deny it. "I plan for outcomes," he replied. I looked around again, at the space, at the quiet, at the control built into every detail, and then back at him, because suddenly the question was not whether I was safe here, it was whether I could ever leave it the same way I entered. I shifted Liam in my arms and took a step forward anyway, because whatever this was, it had already begun the moment I opened my door. And I had the unsettling feeling that Adrian had known that long before I did. The room they led me to did not look like a place someone stayed temporarily. It looked like a place someone had already decided I would not leave from, and that realization sat heavy in my chest as I stepped inside. Everything was prepared, not just clean, not just organized, but intentional. A smaller bed near the window, a larger one closer to the wall, soft lighting, even a folded set of clothes placed neatly at the foot like someone had guessed my size without asking. I stood there for a moment without moving, Liam still in my arms, because this was not protection anymore, this was planning, and I did not know which part unsettled me more. you can rest, Adrian said from behind me, his voice quieter now. Like the space demanded it, like everything here was meant to. Lower your guard slowly. I turned, my expression tightening despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of me. You knew I would come, I said, not a question, because it did not feel like one anymore. He did not deny it, did not explain, just met my gaze with that same steady calm that made everything feel inevitable. I knew you would choose what was necessary, he replied. I exhaled slowly, shifting Liam as he curled closer into me, and walked toward the bed, setting him down gently. Careful not to wake him fully, his small hand still gripping my sleeve until I eased it free. For a moment, everything else faded, the house, the control, the man watching from the doorway, and it was just me and my son, the only thing that had ever mattered enough to fight for. I sat beside him, brushing his hair back, grounding myself in something real, something that had not been decided for me. You should sleep too, Adrian said after a moment, still not moving further into the room, still keeping that distance that somehow felt more deliberate than if he had crossed it. I looked up at him, studying him again, searching for something I could understand, something human beneath all the control. Do you ever stop deciding things for other people? I asked quietly. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, not softer, not exactly, but aware. Only when they decide for themselves, he said. I let out a breath that felt like it had been building since the moment he knocked on my door, because that answer was not what I expected, and that made it harder to push him into the role I needed him to play in my head. I stood slowly, my body reminding me how long this night had been. How much had changed in a matter of hours, and moved toward the window, needing space, needing distance even in a place that clearly limited both. Outside, the ground stretched out in silence, lights marking edges I could not see, boundaries I could not measure, and it hit me again. This place was not just hidden, it was controlled in a way that left no room for uncertainty. If I try to leave, I said without turning around, because I needed to hear it, needed to know where I stood. What happens? The silence behind me lasted just long enough to make the answer matter more, and when he spoke, it was calm, even, like he was stating something simple. You will not be stopped, he said, and for a second relief flickered, quick and fragile, until he continued, but you will not be safe. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle, because it was not a threat, not the way I expected, it was something else, something colder and more absolute. I turned back to him slowly, meeting his gaze again, and this time I saw it clearer, not just control, not just power, but certainty, the kind that did not need to be proven. Then this is not protection, I said quietly, it is a choice you already made for me. Adrian held my gaze, unflinching, and for the first time since this started, there was something close to honesty in the way he answered. No, he said, it is the only choice that keeps you alive. And the way he said it made something in my chest tighten again, because deep down, I was starting to believe him. Sleep did not come easily even after the door closed behind him, even after the house settled into that unnatural silence that felt too controlled to be peaceful. I stood there for a long time, watching Liam breathe, counting each rise and fall like it was the only thing keeping me anchored, because everything else had shifted too fast for me to catch up. I told myself this was temporary, that I would figure a way out, that I had handled worse before. But something about this place made those thoughts feel smaller, less certain. I moved quietly around the room, touching things without meaning to, the edge of the dresser, the fabric of the curtains, the folded clothes left for me, and every detail confirmed the same thing. Nothing here was accidental. Even the clock on the wall ticked softly, controlled, measured, like time itself had been adjusted to fit his world. I finally sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion pressing down on me in waves, but my mind refused to slow, replaying everything, the knock, the headlights, his voice, the way he said I already belonged to him like it was not a claim but a fact. I shook my head slightly, pushing the thought away, because if I let it settle, it would change something inside me I was not ready to lose. A soft sound pulled my attention back to Liam as he shifted, his eyes opening halfway, confused, searching, and I leaned down immediately, brushing his hair back the way I always did, grounding both of us. It is okay, I whispered again, even though the words felt thinner now, stretched over something uncertain. His small fingers curled around mine, holding on, trusting, and that trust steadied me more than anything else could. Mom, he murmured softly, his voice still heavy with sleep, where are we? I hesitated, because I did not have an answer that would make sense, not to him, not even to myself, so I chose the simplest truth I could give. Somewhere safe, I said quietly, and for a moment I wondered if I believed it. He nodded slightly, already drifting again. Because children accept what they are given when they feel protected, and that realization settled deep in my chest, heavier than before. I could not afford to be wrong about this. I lay down beside him, not fully, just enough to feel his warmth, and stared at the ceiling, letting the silence stretch, listening for something, anything, that would remind me this was not permanent. But the silence held, uninterrupted, controlled, and that was when I noticed it. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence, something just beyond the door, steady, unmoving. I sat up slightly, my body tensing without thinking. My instincts sharpening in a way they always did when something felt off, and I listened closer. There it was, faint but real, footsteps earlier, then nothing, then the quiet weight of someone still there, watching, waiting, guarding. I exhaled slowly, because of course there would be someone outside, of course nothing here was left unprotected, unobserved, uncontrolled, and yet, that realization did not feel as threatening as it should have, not entirely, because it meant one thing I could not ignore: nothing would reach us without going through him first. I leaned back again, my hand still wrapped around Liam's, and closed my eyes for a moment, just a moment, because exhaustion eventually wins even when fear tries to hold on. But before sleep could take me fully, one thought surfaced, clear and sharp, cutting through everything else. I was not trapped in a place I could not leave. I was in a place where leaving would cost more than staying, and that difference changed everything. Morning came too quietly, like the world outside this place had been muted on purpose, and for a second I forgot where I was until I opened my eyes and saw the unfamiliar ceiling above me. Liam was still asleep beside me, his small hand resting against my arm, grounding me instantly, reminding me why I had not walked away when I still could have tried. I sat up slowly, listening, expecting noise, movement, something, but the silence remained, controlled, deliberate, like everything else here. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him, and crossed the room, my steps soft against the floor, every instinct still alert even in a place that claimed safety. The door opened without resistance when I tried it, and that surprised me more than if it had been locked, because it meant exactly what he had said. I could leave, but that did not mean I should. The hallway stretched out in clean lines and soft light, no clutter, no randomness, just quiet order, and as I stepped into it, I felt it again, that subtle awareness that I was not alone, not really. I followed the faint sound of movement downstairs, not voices, just presence, and when I reached the bottom, I saw him. Adrian stood near a long window, sunlight cutting across the room and catching the edges of everything, but somehow never softening. He was already dressed, composed, like the night before had not disrupted anything for him, like bringing someone into his world was just another part of his routine. He turned slightly when he sensed me, not surprised, just aware, like he had been expecting me to come down at this exact moment. "You should have rested longer," he said, his voice calm, steady, as if we had known each other longer than a few hours. I crossed my arms instinctively, holding on to that small piece of distance I still controlled. "I do not sleep well in places that are not mine," I replied. His gaze held mine for a second, unreadable, then shifted slightly, acknowledging without arguing. "It will feel different soon," he said. I almost challenged that, almost pushed back, but something stopped me. Not agreement, just the recognition that he believed it. "Where is Liam supposed to go?" I asked instead, because that mattered more than anything else. Adrian gestured slightly toward the adjoining room, and I followed his motion, noticing it for the first time, a smaller space, set up simply, toys already placed, books stacked neatly, like someone had studied what a child might need without ever meeting him. "You planned that too?" I said quietly, not hiding the edge in my voice this time. He did not deny it. "I prepare for variables," he replied. I let out a breath, because everything with him came back to control, to outcomes, to decisions made before I even knew I was part of them. "He is not a variable," I said, sharper now, stepping closer without thinking. "He is my son." Something in his expression shifted again, not defensive, not dismissive, just aware, and he held my gaze without stepping back. "And that is exactly why he is protected," Adrian said. The words landed differently this time, not like ownership, not like a claim, but something else, something closer to acknowledgement, and that unsettled me more than anything else he had said. I turned away before I could respond, before I could let that thought settle into something I could not control, and moved toward the kitchen area, needing space, needing distance, even if it was temporary. The room was already set, coffee steaming, food prepared, like someone had anticipated everything I would need. Before I asked, and I realized something that tightened my chest again, in this place, I did not have to struggle for anything. I did not have to plan every step, count every dollar, fight for every small piece of stability. Everything was already handled, and that was exactly what made it dangerous, because for the first time in a long time, part of me wanted to stop fighting, just for a moment, just long enough to breathe, and I did not know if I could afford to want that. I did not touch the coffee right away, even though the warmth drifted toward me like an invitation I had not earned, because accepting small comforts in a place like this felt more dangerous than refusing them. Instead I stood there, watching the steam rise, watching how everything had already been prepared without a single question asked, and it unsettled me how easy it would be to stop resisting. "You are thinking too much," Adrian said from behind me, not moving closer, just stating it like a fact he had already measured. I let out a quiet breath, my fingers resting lightly against the edge of the counter, grounding myself. "I do not have the luxury of thinking less," I replied. There was a pause, not tense, not heavy, just present, and when I turned slightly, I found him watching me in that same quiet way, like he was reading something deeper than words. Before I could say anything else, soft footsteps echoed from the hallway, uneven but determined, and I turned instinctively. Liam appeared at the edge of the room, his hair still messy from sleep, his small eyes scanning the unfamiliar space until they landed on me, and immediately he moved, quick, certain, closing the distance without hesitation. I dropped to one knee without thinking, opening my arms, and he stepped into them like nothing had changed, like the world had not shifted overnight. "You left," he murmured softly against my shoulder, not accusing, just stating what he felt. I held him tighter for a second, brushing his hair back. "I am right here," I said quietly, and this time I made myself believe it. He pulled back slightly, his gaze drifting past me again, landing on Adrian, and I felt it, that subtle tension, that protective instinct rising before I could stop it. "Who is that?" Liam asked, his voice small but steady. I hesitated, because there was no simple answer. Nothing that would make sense to him, nothing that would not carry weight. I was still trying to understand myself. But before I could respond, Adrian spoke, his tone different again, controlled but softer, measured in a way that did not intrude. "Someone making sure you and your mom are safe," he said. Liam studied him for a moment, quiet, observant in that way children are when they are trying to understand something without fear telling them how to feel. Then, slowly, he nodded, like he accepted it for now, like safety mattered more than explanation. I exhaled quietly, not realizing I had been holding my breath, and stood again, keeping Liam close. "We are not staying long," I said, more to myself than to him, but Adrian heard it anyway. "Of course he did. You can leave whenever you decide to," he said calmly, "but the world outside has not changed." I turned to face him fully this time, the weight of that statement settling in again, because he was right, and I hated that he was right. "Then change it," I said before I could stop myself, the words sharper than I intended, driven by something deeper than frustration, something closer to challenge. For the first time, something shifted in his expression in a way I could not ignore, not softer, not harder, just real, like I had stepped into a space he did not often let people reach. "I already am," Adrian replied quietly. The room fell silent after that, not empty, not neutral, but charged in a way I could not explain, like something had just begun that neither of us fully controlled anymore. I looked down at Liam, at the way his hand still held onto mine without question, and then back at Adrian. Because for the first time since this started, I was not just reacting to him, I was questioning what came next, and that was a different kind of danger entirely. The silence after his words did not fade, it settled, deeper than before, like something had shifted into place without asking either of us for permission. I felt Liam's hand tighten around mine, small, warm, real, and it grounded me in a way nothing else could, because no matter how controlled this world was, no matter how carefully everything had been planned, this was still my choice to make, at least in the ways that mattered most. "We are not staying forever," I said quietly, not looking at Adrian this time, because the words were not for him, they were for me, a line I needed to draw before everything blurred together. Liam looked up at me, searching my face like He always did when he wanted to understand something deeper than what I said, and then he nodded, trusting me without question, and that trust settled into my chest like a promise I could not break. Adrian did not respond right away, and when I finally looked at him, he was watching us, not with control this time, not exactly, but with something more measured, like he was observing a boundary he had already considered. "Forever is not required," he said after a moment, his tone even, almost neutral, "but time is." I frowned slightly, not liking the way that sounded, not liking how open it felt, like something that could stretch further than I was prepared to accept. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice steady now, because fear had already done its part and left something sharper behind. His gaze held mine, calm, certain, and when he answered, it was not rushed, not forced, just inevitable. "For you to see what you are already part of," he said. The word settled in the space between us, heavier than anything else he had said, because this time it was not about danger outside, it was about something closer, something that had already reached into my life before I understood it. I shook my head slightly, not rejecting it, not fully, but refusing to accept it without question. "I did not choose this," I said. Adrian stepped closer then, not enough to invade, but enough to shift the space between us, to make the distance feel intentional instead of accidental. "You chose to protect your son," he replied, his voice lower now, more focused. Everything else followed. I inhaled slowly, because that was the truth I could not argue with, the one thing that made every step I had taken unavoidable. Liam tugged lightly at my hand, drawing my attention back to him, and I knelt beside him again, brushing his hair back, steadying myself in something simple, something that had not changed. "Can we go outside?" he asked softly, glancing toward the large windows, toward the light that filtered through them. I hesitated for only a second before answering, because I needed to see it too, needed to understand where we were beyond walls and quiet control. "We will," I said gently, standing again and looking toward Adrian, not asking, not exactly, but acknowledging that this was his space, his world. He gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough, always enough. We moved toward the doors together, not side by side, not yet, but not separate either, and as the light grew stronger, as the outside came into view, I felt it again, that shift, that quiet realization that had been building since the moment I opened my door. I was not just in his world, I was beginning to understand it, piece by piece, step by step, and that was the part that scared me the most, because understanding meant something deeper than survival. It meant I might not want to leave as quickly as I thought, and that was a line I was not ready to cross.